All right, we are back with part 2 of inflation. Part 1 video, we talked about the key causes of inflation. We talked about the definition of inflation and how inflation affects you. Now, in this part 2, we need to dive into measuring inflation, and I need to read to you from the Intelligent Investor about why we even have inflation, right? Why is that even a thing for us to be dealing with? Okay, so there are two indexes that measure inflation for us. One of them is called the Consumer Price Index, that's CPI, and the other is the Producer's Price Index. Those are the common tools for measuring inflation. Now, CPI is something that you guys may be very familiar with. And if you're a working person, they try to give you annual raises of CPI. Please understand, when that is happening, that is doing nothing but bringing you to zero. Okay? I want you to understand this. So a lot of companies, and myself included, a lot of companies that I've worked for, they do annual raises based on CPI. That basically says that they look at the inflation rate, CPI measures your inflation, and they give you a raise to zero. So just want to put some real examples to this. So your $100, okay, let's say the inflation rises, right? So your $100 ain't $100. Your $100 more like $80, okay? They'll give you a raise and say that they're giving you $120, right? But your buying power is at that $100. So you gotta understand that is one of the hugest tricks that we all fall into, is that, I got my CPI raise. You did not get a raise. You were literally brought to zero. It is not additional money for you. It is your company correcting your buying power with its spending power, which is you, who they're spending on, bringing you to flush, okay? Whenever you are getting CPI raises, know that is basically like nothing. It's basically their way of saying, thanks, keep working for zero, okay? And a lot of y'all are not gonna like me saying this, because it is such a, we'll get into the fabric of why you want to make someone work, right? But just know that when you are getting a CPI raise, or when they say, we increase rates annually based on CPI, they might as well tell you, we increase rates annually based on the money that you're already losing. That's what it is. And this is why this financial education and this investing for beginners class is so important for my folks, because this is information you're not told. And they gonna want you to be grateful for that CPI, right? You're supposed to be grateful for that CPI. That CPI is nothing. It's nothing, okay? So when they give you the CPI, you need to say, okay, thank you, where's my raise? And if they say, you got adjusted for inflation, basically. You gave me money that adjusted for inflation. You gave me money simply so I can continue to pay for parking, continue to pay for lunches, continue to pay for clothes, continue to pay for makeup, continue to pay for everything I gotta pay to go to work every day, right? That's all they're giving you. So it's like they're bringing you to zero, because inflation causes your dollar to fall negative. They're bringing you up to zero. Okay, so I do really want you guys to understand that about inflation, and particularly about CPI and what it really is when you are an employee. Okay, now let's get into what Benjamin Graham says, the Intelligent Investor, on page 60. The third bullet point, okay? I'm going to read it to you, then we're going to talk about it. It says, raising prices allows the government to pay off its debts with dollars that have been cheapened by inflation. Completely ending inflation runs against the economic interests of any government that regularly borrows money. Okay, you need to hear that again. Raising prices allows the government to pay off its debts with dollars that have been cheapened by inflation. Completely ending inflation runs against the economic self-interest of our government because it regularly borrows money. Is this starting to churn a little bit? Inflation is baked into our government's economic self-interest. And when our inflation rate rises, okay, the government is allowed to pay off its debts by dollars that have been cheapened. They've been cheapened for us. That has been cheapened by inflation. So it works against your government's interest to lower or end inflation. Okay? You really have to understand that, especially in this current political climate and the political climates to come, okay? Completely eradicating inflation or lowering inflation goes against our government's economic self-interest. Because if the government does that, then our dollar increases and it's more expensive for them to borrow. And remember, we are a borrowing debt country. So they need inflation to be up. So our dollar is cheap so they can say, hey, I'm going to give you 75 cents even though I owe you $1, but the 75 cents is $1 now. Because the money has been cheapened on our end. Okay? You really have to understand that. And I go back to the major note in part 1. Stocks outpace inflation every time. Stocks outpace inflation every time. Okay? Because the investors and the business owners and the government wants to win. So they have to have some way for them to make money. And that's the bandwagon that you're jumping on. I'm going to take these last 3 minutes, okay? What can you do as a regular smegular Joe Blow, okay? When inflation is high, this is the time to turn within and become more resourceful and more resilient. This is the time to curb your spending habits. Meaning, if I give you $100, you're going to spend $100, right? But if I give you $100, it's high inflation. Your $100 is only worth $75. I'm going to need for you to spend like it's $50. Okay? Do you see how your own action can be the resistance? When inflation is high, tell these folks that you are not spending. That you're not buying how you used to buy. That Christmas ain't Christmas how it used to be Christmasing. Right? Thanksgiving ain't Thanksgiving. You're not buying every... Wow, they cut my video off, guys. TikTok did not like what I was telling y'all. But of course it would not. Because I'm telling you to stop spending. I'm telling you to pull the reins on that spending horse when inflation is high. If you want to send a message to this government, to these politicians, to these companies, hold your money. Ask yourself, do you need it? And the difference between needs and wants is mountains and valleys. So build your economic resistance in times of inflation by curbing your wants. Okay? We'll come back and we'll talk about index funds.